Hello and welcome to Profiles in Risk. This is your host, Tony Cañas. And today I am recording a career episode that should be really, really interesting with Carlos Miguel Vidal. Carlos, how's it going today?
Good. Thank you, Tony, for the opportunity to talk to you and to your listeners.
Awesome. The reason that it should be really interesting is because Carlos has done a lot of different things within our industry, and both domestically in the US where I'm at and most of my listeners are at, and also in other markets like Latin America and even London. So you've had a really interesting career, but I want to quickly tell the story of how we met. So Insurtech Connect 2018, I think it was, before the pandemic. And I'm meeting everybody, especially a lot of people that I've been following for years. And then I see this guy wearing really, really nice red glasses. I still have a picture of it to this day. And I stop him and I'm like, where did you get those glasses? I've been looking for red glasses for years. And it turns out that he had bought them in South America. So I have not been able to look at them yet. I did find the pair, but they're just blue light. But of course, I immediately forgot about that meeting until we reconnected after Insurtech Connect 2021, and I asked him how we met, and he actually remembered. So that's how we got connected. It was my love of red, basically. So Carlos, you've got just an incredible history. And you spent a lot of your career done in Peru, in South America. How did you fall into the insurance industry?
Well, thank you. Yeah, the red glasses have their own story for me too, but we'll leave that for another day. I was born into the industry. My father was the first broker here in Peru back in 1963. He had been working for a local insurance company. You know, back then here in Peru, you only had exclusive agents for insurance companies. However, in the U.S., where he had studied and he had worked, he had seen that there was this role of a broker. So in '63, he decided to start the first broker in Peru. So he has the license 001, and that same year he started representing Marsh and Gary Carpenter. I was born a bit later. So I was born into the industry. And to be honest, until I finished university in Boston, I had no clue what he did. It was very hard for me to understand what a broker did. However, there was a fancy name there called Marsh McLennan Company. So in school, when you were a little kid and they asked you, what does your father do? I said he worked for this company. So, it sort of made me feel important because I couldn't really tell anyone what he did. And finished school in the US, and out of 5 siblings, I was the only one who decided to come into the industry without really knowing what I was getting into. However, he warned me. He said, well, whoever comes in doesn't leave. And he was right, but he said, you're not going to work with me initially. So you're going to go pay your dues and your mistakes in an insurance company. And that's what I did. I started a local company called Pacifico Seguros, which had a joint venture with AIG back then. And the first 2 years working with them, I walked around the whole company, did a lot of everything, learning. And day by day, my passion started growing. Then I went to the UK to work for what was then CT Bowring, which is Marsh now. And, learned about the reinsurance market, which was really interesting. Liked it, but wasn't really my passion. My passion was more on the retail, on the personal line side, which is why I liked most of it. And after more than a year there, I came back and started working with him, which was very interesting. My father had a hard personality, but learned a lot from him. And worked with him for 4 years before 4 years it was before Marsh actually bought the company. So, in between 2000 and 2004, I worked for Marsh in what was the affinity department or personal lines, However, we had the Spitzer problem with them in 2004, and Marsh started cutting down on the affinity departments, which really was a line of business that were just really fairly new to them, or something they really understand. However, my time with Marsh was really, really good. I learned a lot. And one of the main things I learned from a guy called Jim Biggs, who I wish I could reconnect with him. He said, look, Carlos, 80% is the same everywhere. 20% is just customization by market, by country. And throughout my career, I've been able to validate that. I know not everyone agrees with it, but from what I've seen, 80% is pretty much the same everywhere, So after Marsh, I went back to work for the carrier. I had initially initiated my career with Pacifico, and it happened that there was a management change. So, when the management changed, they asked me to help it because of my experience in different areas. So I was lucky enough to work in reinsurance again. I handled the claims department for a while. I was on the commercial side, on the strategic side. I did a bit of everything for 6 years, which was fantastic, And after that, I went for a year to work for Willis. I was the CEO of Willis Peru here. To be honest, by then I was really tired of the corporate world. I was always trying to do different things, and working for big corporations that's not necessarily a natural fit. They got a lot of laws and regulations, and you're trying to do different things, and so it's like getting a jacket that is too small for you. It doesn't really fit. So in 2012, when I left the corporate world, I didn't know really what to do. So one of the ideas I had, well,
hold on. A couple of questions, because just thinking of the questions that we usually get from listeners. So number one, how did you get the opportunity in London? Because I can't tell you how often I get people asking, like, how do I get a job in London?
In this case, it was because of my father and him representing Marsh, So he spoke with Marsh and he said, I want to train my son. And Marsh was already looking to buy the company, So it was in the 90s. Marsh had a big expansion here in Latin America. They basically bought a company. They had representatives in the region. They started buying companies, So like I mentioned, I grew up within Marsh. It's interesting because when you're a little kid and your father brings his businessman to your home and say, come down and say hello, and you're like, moaning and groaning because I gotta say hello to this big old man. And now looking back, I said, well, wow, I wish I would have said hello to a lot of these guys. Yeah. Because when I started working, these guys were up in the ladder, so uncle.
So at Pacifico, so you're there for like 6 or 7 years. You did a little bit of everything: personal lines manager, then commercial planning manager, reinsurance manager, claims manager. So you kind of did the rounds and got a very well-rounded experience at Pacifico, and you end up in this project manager role, strategic projects. How do you go from there to CEO for Willis Peru?
Oh, that's an interesting story. One of the things here in Peru was that brokers. Peru is a very small market. 4 companies have about 85% of the market. Okay. And in terms of brokers, it is very concentrated. For example, Marsh in Peru has like 35% of the market. It's strange, And we thought from Pacifico's perspective that there needed to be a change in dynamics in the brokers market. Okay. Pacific is part of a big financial corporation called Credit Corp. Okay. And Credit Corp was in a process of buying different companies. They bought a lot of health assets, for Pacifico. On the financial side, they were buying assets. So I had this brilliant idea of saying, well, why don't we buy a broker, and set up a broker, because it will help the bank for the bank assurance, And they said, well, which broker should we buy? And I said, well, Willis Re was a reinsurance broker for Pacifico, and they were really good. They were fantastic, and we really liked working with them. However, the retail operation here was not really up to par with the reinsurance side. So I said, why don't we buy Willis, And my boss, David Saetone, said, yeah, let's do that. He was just like me in that sense. So, so we flew to London and we told Willis, you want to do a joint venture? And they said, sure, we want to do a joint venture, And then we went to the Credit Corp board and they said, sure. They were a bit skeptical. So I ended up convincing everyone and getting myself into trouble because then they said, well, you proposed it, you convinced everyone, now you manage it. But as always with what you think is a good idea, or even if it's a good idea, the execution is the key. And it was really hard for the execution because of the politics and a lot of things that went around it, So it was a really tough 1 year for me. It was a learning experience, but I convinced everyone, so I guess I had to give it a shot. And then after a year, we came to an agreement with everyone that it was better for me and everyone that I left, because it was really frustrating for me because I thought the execution was really going to be really smooth. But you learn, as many things in life, that when you're trying to get 2 corporations to work together that they've never done things like this, it's hard, So, but yeah, I left, and after leaving that, I was thinking, what am I going to do with my life now? I've been in this industry for, by then it was like 20 years. So, I'm not going to leave it. I like what I do, And one of the things I tried to do was move to the US or move to a bigger market, which was something I had always wanted to do because, like I mentioned, Peru is a very small market. And I always say, it's like playing in the local soccer tournament, I want to go play in the Premier League. You know, I want to take my skills up there. However, it's not easy. One, there's a visa problem, so it's not that you just walk in the door and start working. That's a challenge by itself. And also, you know, there wasn't really a market out there like probably there is right now for opportunities. You know, so that wasn't really something I could actually bank on. So I said, what do I do now? And one of the things I had in my mind was, well, I see all these problems in the industry. The main one that I see is the means in which we exchange information, you know, and because of the means in which we exchange information, which is basically PDFs, emails, Excel sheets, you know, there's a problem for everyone. You know, there's a problem for the broker because it's very inefficient, for the carrier, for the consumer, for everyone.
It's an incredible waste of time. It's impressive, you know, and it makes no sense because the broker is on an agency management system exporting to PDF, and then the carrier is receiving that and having somebody physically type it into the system. Like we're both using computer systems. Why can't they talk to each other better? I agree completely. Yeah.
And coming from Marsh, you know, like Marsh, you know, being this corporation, and they can't even do that, you know. And my time in Marsh, which was only 4 years, they had these hundreds of ideas we're going to buy this system, and they could never get their hands around it for one reason or the other. So I had this thing that was in my head. Then the other thing that was in my head is, you know, why hasn't anyone built a business model from the consumer's perspective? You know, when I was in the carrier, we were always thinking from the carrier's perspective. We were in the broker, we were thinking from the broker's perspective. But I was trying to get my head around and say, well, why hasn't anyone looked at it from the consumer's perspective? You know, so I said, well, let's see what happens if I start like investigating, you know, and doing some research, you know. So I remember first day I sat and I went into the App Store at Apple, and I couldn't really find any apps for insurance, and they were very limited. So I said, well, there's not much here, you know. So I went into the financial apps, and I found this company that sort of clicked in my head right away, which is Mint, Money Intelligence. Mint that allows you to integrate all your financial relationships in one place. So I said, well, me as a consumer in the insurance industry, I want to have this. So I brought my wife over and I said, would you like to have this for insurance? She said, of course, because my wife had been a victim of it, because every time she called me and she said, I got to take the kids to the doctor. What does the policy cover? I would say, I don't know, do whatever you want, you know. And I work in the insurance industry, and I had no clue because a policy has over 200 pages, you know. So I was a victim of it. My wife was a victim of it. So I said, okay, let me investigate this. So I started interviewing people. I must have done over 500 interviews with individuals, but at the same time interviewing companies, you know, because the problem was tied between two of them. And what I realized is that, you know, we're getting a better understanding is how we relate to the industry. You know, that was very important to know how we relate as individuals, as company with the industry. I'd also started understanding what we do in the industry, which is basically two things. We either consult information or we do transactions. And there's only 5 types of transactions in the industry. You can buy a product, you can pay it, you can use it, you can modify it, and you can renew it. However, you know, we had no autonomy in doing transactions because of the way we exchange information, you know. So the thing that kept on coming back to my head is, but if we only change the means in which we exchange information, we could start interacting with this, because policies are business rules that we agree on with a carrier. So if the business rules are already in agreement, why can't we interact with those business rules just like a bank? You know, and I always use that analogy. You know, I get my ATM card, which is my bank card, which is based on business rules that I've agreed when I open my savings account, for example. And I go to the ATM machine and I can withdraw money and transfer money and do certain things. But if I think about the insurance industry, what would happen is there would be a person behind the ATM machine, you know, and, you know, put your ATM and I said, give me $100, and the person would take 3 weeks, come back and give you $50. You know, so that was the insurance industry, you know. But at the same time, when you want to consult information, which is either on the sales side or on the post-sales side, you can't consult information with autonomy. You have to go to a policy, or you end up depending on third parties, you know. So that was another thing that was in the back of my head. But looking at Mint allows you to do that, to consult information and do transactions, you know, and have, you know, a lot of information that you need. However, it is very important, you know, as I learned, that, you know, financial products are like brushing your teeth. You do that all the time. You do that every day. Insurance is like going to the dentist. You know, you don't want to go to the dentist. But there's another thing to keep in mind is that Insurance is like when your molar hurts, and it's really hurting. That's a claim, and you want someone to take care of the claim, But you can't really, because you have, again, no autonomy and control. The other thing that I started investigating, and there's a parenthesis here, 2012, the Insurtech category didn't even really exist. It was a subcategory of finance, of fintech.
Yeah,
we
didn't have a word for Insurtech. You were really one of the first playing in that space.
And you couldn't find a conference, you couldn't find anyone writing on Twitter and LinkedIn. It was crazy. But okay, say, well, this is probably an opportunity. The other thing that I kept on going back to is, we talk about eliminating the broker, we talk about the carrier, but I was thinking more about roles, and to me the roles are key in this process, because there's 7 roles in the industry that I don't think are going away anytime soon. One role is a consumer, the other role of the distribution channel, the role of the advisor or consultant, the role of the risk taker, who's taking on the risk, the role of the regulator, the role of the reinsurer, and the role of the service provider. Service provider being hospital, clinics, repair shops, adjusters. They provide a service. And you can have more than one role. So, for example, a broker has 3 roles. They're a consumer because they purchase insurance. They act as a distribution channel, and their main role is an advisor consultant. And to me, that's the key. Brokers are here to stay, and they're going to become even more relevant in the future, because they can not only advise you, but they can provide products. And carriers can have up to 5 roles: consumer, distribution channel. They take on risk. They act as a reinsurance if they want to, and they can be a service provider if they integrate vertical with hospitals or whatever. So roles was important. What we do in the industry, consult and transact, was important. And then when you start looking at how we relate, that was the key for me, because we relate 4 ways as individuals. One is through work. And in work, you have 2 types of relationships. The ones you get by law. So I'll give you an example in Peru. In Peru, you have Social Security. You have your private or government pension fund has insurance. You get something called compulsory life when you walk in the door, that the company has to buy for you. And then what you call a high-risk workers' comp. So anyone that is on a payroll has 4 products, and they haven't chosen one of them. Okay. And right there and then, you go from the guy in the top segment of the population to the bottom, everyone has 4 products. Then you have the products that you get as a benefit. Whether the company pays or not, it's a benefit. But keep in mind, too, that work is very important, at least from my perspective in the industry, because it's where most of us are first introduced to insurance on our own. Because before that, we are probably under our parents' or university's program, health or whatever. When you start working, you really start getting, your insurance products on your own. Okay, so that's a place where I would look if I would want to develop business, because you can plant a seed right there. The other place you relate to, the second one, is through financial products. And there you have 2 types of relationships, some that are mandatory and some that are benefits. So for example, in Peru, every single credit card and every personal loan has a life policy that covers the outstanding debt. Okay, and that is millions of people that have a life policy. Okay. In the US, I understand, for example, that you have to show that you have insurance when you mortgage. So it's mandatory, whether you bring it or not, that you have to have insurance. And then the other part, which is the benefit, is if you look at your credit card, most of the time you will find that there's some sort of insurance that you're getting provided as a benefit, whether it's travel insurance, medical, or whatever. So you have work, you have financial relationships. The third way you relate to the industry is through the open market, where there's tons of distribution channels selling all kinds of products. In some countries, there's more distribution channels than others. So for example, in Peru here, department stores can sell insurance, financial institutions can sell insurance, gas stations can sell insurance. Basically, anyone can sell insurance, But those products are then broken up into 2 types. The ones that are mandatory. So for example, auto liability. And then the ones that are optional, in which you decide what to buy. That's the third way you relate to the industry. The fourth way is through friends and family. So what products does my father have? If something happens to my father, I want to know what he has. If I'm going to leave my kids because I'm going away with my sister, the first thing she's going to ask is, well, what insurance do you have? So there's a thing there that we have to keep in mind. So by looking at this map, what you start realizing, it is very hard to know what you have, where you have it, how it works, will it work? And you end up depending on third parties to do everything. So you have no autonomy and control for anything, And then when you look at companies, they also have a problem, because they relate either through the HR side, which is related to the same problem you have as a consumer on the work side, and then what the products that you get through what you would call your risk manager or financial guy, which are into two groups: the ones that the company has to buy by law, and the ones the company has to buy. So you start really digging into this, you realize there's an opportunity there to put this all together. However, unlike Mint, where there's open APIs by law in the US, in the insurance industry, that doesn't exist. So by then I had invested almost 2 years and a lot of money into this, and I was almost ready to walk away. And I said, well, kept on looking at Mint, and I realized that Mint had something that I could pivot to, which is, after a couple of years of Mint, regional banks started looking at Mint and saying, well, can you provide us with a white label product like the one you have? Because instead of us developing the same system you have for our own clients, can we get a white label? So that's when I said, well, distribution channels need that same thing. You need to provide that same product to your clients, so that, for example, I use a Marsh example. So Marsh has to provide to their clients a system or an app where the clients can consult information and perform transactions based on the products they have. So based on my relationship with Marsh, I was able to convince the local Marsh company to jump on it. But that was a story that was very long, because trying to convince a corporation and getting all the approvals and things like that took forever. So after 7 years of doing this, which got me to ITC, met a lot of people like yourself. We were lucky enough to win an award, which is in 2019. We won an award at ITC for the most innovative startup in Latin America. The bad part was that I was about to leave the company when that happened, but it was, it was something you take, a medal you take with you. So after 7 years in that world, I had to walk away. I probably should have walked away sooner, but like I learned afterwards, being in a startup is the hardest thing you can do, and no one really understands it unless you've been there. All you look is what Hollywood tells you, and that is not even close to reality. Because even if you have success, the road to the success really takes a beating to you. And I encourage anyone that is out there in a startup to find out information about how tough it is. More than happy if someone wants to reach out to me. It really plays into your head. You end up making mistakes. You're always thinking you're almost there, the last mile, you're there. And it's tough as hell. And if I'm not mistaken, over 80% of startups fail, not because the idea is bad, because you run out of money. And running out of money and having to let go of a dream is the hardest thing that can happen to you. So please, anyone that wants to reach out, more than happy to talk to you. So I've talked a lot.
So yeah, the Hello Zoom adventure was quite an adventure, and it is so hard in our industry where things are so slow. It is so hard to and by definition, very few of the startups can do everything themselves. The great majority, 95% of them, are trying to partner with the industry in some way or another, and the industry is so slow. It's very, 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 very difficult. And so then you leave Hello Zoom, and so Red Salud, if I'm not mistaken, it's a part-time type thing, right? Like you're not 100% dedicated to that right now.
It's a good friend of mine, Ivan Vasquez. We started the industry almost at the same time. Pacifico Seguros, became really good friends. He stayed on the health side. I started doing other things. In 2002 or 3, I think it was, he went to work in the US, and he developed this unique knowledge about opportunities for the underserved market, So about 6 years ago, he came back to Peru and he founded Red Salud, which provides health insurance plans for the underserved market. He's been very successful, over 2 million individual clients in a segment where no carrier has had success here and in many parts of the world. And when I left, he said, we had been talking because he had started his startup, I was in mine. So we got together quite often. Our offices were close to, and he had always been bugging me, come work with me, And then when I left, he said, come work with me. However, him being a startup, he couldn't really offer me a full-time job. It was help me out, be a producer, this is what we can do together, And so I started working with him. However, the pandemic hit us 2 months into this adventure, which was good in a sense, because it put health insurance at the front of everything, every conversation. So if health insurance was your number one priority before, now it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Your first 5 priorities were health insurance, especially in the underserved world, where the main problem, in countries like ours and even in the US, it's like Social Security doesn't work properly, and it's two problems. In some places, it's what it covers, or it doesn't cover, but in most places, it's the infrastructure you can access. Okay, and day-to-day people that use those services are not thinking long-term when it comes to health. So they're not thinking about a hip replacement or heart surgery. They're thinking that if my ear is hurting, I want to go see a doctor. And even before the pandemic, getting an appointment here in Peru for Social Security could take a week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks. After the pandemic, now they have over 3 million, consultations that they haven't even looked at, because hospitals were closed, so huge problem, So Red Salud, concentrates basically on your day-to-day health. I'll do it inverse in this way. Red Salud doesn't cover surgeries. Red Salud doesn't cover emergencies. Red Salud doesn't cover emergencies. Red Salud covers consultations, your day-to-day. So if you want to go see a doctor because your ear hurts, Red Salud gives you access to a network of hospitals exactly like a private insurance company. So you can get an appointment right away. You can walk into the clinic and get medical attention, Red Salud also covers the medications that are derived from those consultations. They work with generic medicines based on protocols. Red Salud can also cover the images and the lab work. So that's a bread and butter of Red Salud. It's
it's distributed not by agents, right? It's distributed by all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned a bit back, in Peru, banks and everyone can redistribute insurance. So basically the first ones to jump on were bank and financial institutions. Bank assurance is very big here, which was key for Red Salud because that meant the expenses and the burden of distributing and collecting was on the bank. So Red Salud was sitting in the back, just receiving the client and the collections, and the bank doing the marketing, the sales, and the collections. So that made that you could have a very lean and very small operation. And along the way, Ivan was smart based on his experience to start developing his own IT systems for certain specific tasks, because really there was no systems for health insurance companies like the one he was building. So he started building that, and he's a very digital company. So along the way from banks, we started migrating to selling directly to companies. For example, here in Peru, private medical plans that are offered to employees only penetrate 25% of the working population. The reason being that even though your employer can pay for it, using the product is very expensive, co-payments and deductibles. Well, if you go to the Social Security, everything is free. You don't get medical attention, but it's free, So they penetrate very small. So we started accessing companies, and then brokers have started really picking up. Brokers have realized there's a gold mine there because they have all these employee benefit plans with employees not actually buying into them because they're too expensive. So, the pandemic has opened that. Another key thing from the pandemic, from my previous life, I was able to bring AWS to the table. So beginning of the pandemic, we got an agreement with AWS to develop the telemedicine. And they were key because in the segment we go after, they don't use iPhones or Samsung Galaxies. They use Huawei or any phone they can get their hands on. So it's a technical issue with the operating systems these phones have. That's number one. Number two is the mobile operators don't have the same type of signal throughout the country. So you have to have a very lightweight module to connect with these people anywhere in the country, because we don't use Zoom, we don't use WhatsApp, we don't use any, it's just being built by us. But that also allowed us to build the telemedicine module we knew our clients wanted to have. So they have their own medical history built into that. We can't see it, which is, if you try to go to a hospital and get your medical history, it is really tough. In this case, you build on your own medical history here. However, you learn along the way that a lot of people are camera shy, so not everyone turns the camera on. So trying to do a consultation can be tricky, but new, very innovative distribution channels we're going to be launching very soon. We have a deal with a TV network that is going to be very interesting. We have a deal with a radio station that is going to be very interesting. We have a deal on the way with electronic wallets, which in this part of the world are very important, because keep in mind that banking penetration, for example, in Peru only reaches about 30% of the population, okay? And it's not because people are just avoiding the law. It is that it's very expensive to work with banks, and it's very complicated to work with banks, even though they don't say that, but it is, So people, are, informal, we can call them. They don't pay taxes like you and I would do.
Unbanked is what we say in the States, but yeah.
Yeah. So, so electronic wallets are becoming very popular, and that will give us access to 70% of the population that doesn't use banks. Also, another thing that I've been helping Ivan and Red Salud is with the international expansion, which is there's big opportunity out there. Thing there is the regulations. So trying to get a license in each country is really tough. So finding, a strategic partner is key. So if anyone wants to look at it, give us a call. We'll listen. But yeah, finding a strategic partner is key. But yeah, it's a part-time job.
And I love what you guys are doing in that it goes to the very heart of what insurance does, helping the people that need help, figuring out how to finance that, and it's so different from the developed markets, and it's so interesting the many ways in which it can be distributed, and how you have to learn to adapt even to things like people don't, too many people not using an iPhone or even an Android phone. So even the operating system is different. So very, very, very interesting. I think it's a great story for other insurance people and other future Insurtech founders that want to do work in the developing world.
Yeah. Look, I've been looking at this model, how it would apply to other countries. So yeah, third world countries are classic because Social Security doesn't work. But the first world has the same problem. So I'll use the US as an example. You guys in the US have Obamacare, Medicare, all these type of programs.
It's a
But you
disaster.
still have, yeah, and you still have like 30 million people that have no plans.
It's incredible. Yeah. And even those of us with insurance are, one bad disease or accident away from bankruptcy. Like it's absolutely shameful, without getting too political.
Yeah. But like I learned from my ex-boss David Sartone. He used to talk about the salami example. You don't buy a salami and start biting it. You slice it. I think that's the same with insurance. You gotta slice it. So when you look at medical, is how do you slice it? So you take it apart and you think, okay, day to day. What are we thinking day to day? What do people need in day to day? And that's exactly what Red Salud did. He said, I'm not going to do everything. It is very complicated. I'm not going to get into hard stuff because the target market I'm going after doesn't care about that. They want to go see a doctor if their kid has diarrhea. That's not an emergency. He wants to access a doctor. So I'm just going to do that. Okay. And if I ever go into the hard stuff, it's going to be very limited, just so I can give a product that is probably, a bit more complete, but no, you slice, in the insurance industry, and this is my 2 cents, for one reason or the other, we tend to complicate everything. And I don't think insurance is that complicated. Yes, contracts are very complicated because of regulators and all that. But if you really think about the industry, like I mentioned before, you only do two things. Either you consult information or you do transactions. You don't do anything else than that. So if you start really putting the things on the table and try to simplify them, we can be much more efficient as an industry. So going to what you were saying, if you think about the US, I'm sure those 30 million people, that have no plan, if you offer them a plan for say $50 a month, they probably could pay it, with deductibles of $10 or $15, because it takes care of their needs, their day-to-day needs. Then if they need a surgery, well, okay, they can go to their, Social Security plans and things like that. Yes, like you mentioned, there's an issue with costs, but at least you're taking care of the bottom part, everyone's day to day. And that has an impact not only socially, but economically, because it takes pressure away from all these hospitals and clinics getting people, or doctors that are getting people that have no coverage. So you're providing coverage. And it generates new revenue streams, and it makes the industry grow, because the industry's been trying to grow for decades and it's growing 2%, 3%. However, you have over 4 billion people that have no insurance. So there's a problem there. And how do you match
there is gigantic opportunity globally but it takes different thinking. It takes different distribution, and it takes going back to the basics of what insurance is, like you were saying, taking all the complication out, and then putting those basics on very, 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 very efficient rails, right? And that can that can expand, that can scale, that can scale radically large, keeping that extra cost per person very, very low.
Yeah, and what I would say along those lines is that, you know, I would encourage VCs and, you know, anyone that is investing in the industry to look outside the US and the traditional markets. You know, there
Yes.
is plenty of diamonds in the rough. You know, the biggest advocate is my friend Patrick Callahan, who and you recently interviewed Temi from PayU in Nigeria. Then you have Hiteshi from claims consultants in India, and I could go on, and those people need only 100K in investment, which is like what it would be $1 million in the US,
Yeah, it would be more. Yeah, a lot more.
It would be more. And the analogy I use is sort of like in the past, and I'll use the NBA. The NBA only used to have players from the US, and then they realized there was a lot of good players outside the US. Here it's the same thing. You got a lot of diamonds in the rough out there, that if you really look for them properly, because a lot of them people say we look for them, but no, you're looking from 30,000 feet above, and you're expecting them to be the same as the US, and they're not, So I think the industry could do a favor to itself, by looking outside, and really they'll be surprised about the diamonds in the rough out there.
100% agreed. Absolutely. And it hopefully the decade of the 2020s will be very, very interesting when it comes to insurance and especially Insurtech expanding beyond the traditional markets. So to do that, we'll need people like yourself that have played in those markets and that get those markets and how they're radically different.
Yeah. One of the things I'm doing now is, for example, like I mentioned, I work part-time for the Salud, but the other half of my day I do is I'm starting to sort of represent Insurtechs from different parts of the world that have fantastic products, or technology companies. They're all startups, and they need distribution, and they don't have the resources to have traditional distribution, So in Peru and in many markets in America, with my contacts, what I do is I offer those services, So that's another way to actually cross borders, use people that have the contacts, and it's very simple because I don't need to do the hard stuff, which is explaining in detail their product or providing post-sale service. All I need to do is connect people, and that's probably half of the thing most of us need, is connecting, And so if you can connect, it's fantastic.
And insurance is a relationship business everywhere. Abroad, it's even more of a relationship business because it's the connections are traditional societies rely more on your reputation and your connections than in the US. We can more okay, I'm kind of all over the place, but I'm trying to say is in a place like the US, we can more easily vet and find and vet because everybody's on LinkedIn, and you could run a background check, you can run a credit check, etc., and fairly easily figure out whether this is somebody you want to partner with. That's much harder abroad. So yeah. you need the people that have those existing connections and that have known the people for a long time and can open those doors for you. And not only that, yeah. Like, will they even talk to you if you don't get introduced by somebody they already trust? Because the same story, they're used to not being able to vet their partners as well.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind, and this is for everywhere, is that as human beings, we don't like change. Okay, that's a natural thing. We get scared of change, especially when it's unknown. And what I've seen throughout my experience is that in this Insurtech world is that incumbents are full of people that have the best intentions, but are very scared because of change. So even though they agree with what you're proposing, they end up giving you the long road to actually say something, or they even say no at the end because they're afraid of change. And like you mentioned, 95% of Insurtechs want to, partner with incumbents, and you've seen throughout the years, incumbents try to do it on their own. I remember when I started with Hello Zoom, knock on the door and say, well, I'm already doing that. I can do it. And 7 years later, they haven't done anything. I have this example, won't name the name, but with this local insurance company, health insurance, we had a product that was a month away to launch. This is back in 2014. And they said, no, we decided we're going to build our own and we're going to be up and running in less than a year. Well, 7 years later, they don't have anything.
Of course.
Of course. So that is something that I think is changing. It still has to change. And the other thing along those lines is that, unfortunately, in big corporations, when it comes to this, there hasn't been accountability. There's been no accountability by people that open the door, they start working with you, and then they give you the high road and they kick you in the butt for no reason. And they're not accountable inside, and that is bad because, you're doing no good to the guy that is trying to sell something. If you could just tell him no from the beginning and that's it, that would be fantastic, but accountability is something I would suggest the big corporations to take into consideration when you're dealing with startups.
It's so hard at a big corporation because it takes so many people to make a decision, and things move so slowly. It's so hard. So Carlos, thank you very much for your time today. It's been very, very interesting. When this goes live, I'll tag your LinkedIn.
Thank you very much.
For those of you listening, if you're looking for somebody with extensive experience in several different markets and playing both carrier and Insurtech side, I think Carlos would be a really interesting conversation for you.
Thank you very much, Tony. And, we hope to see you soon. And I'll get you red glasses next time we see each other.
Awesome. Thank you.